I knew moving into Maple Grove would come with a few headaches. HOA communities always had their quirks: strict trash schedules, passive-aggressive lawn height guidelines, maybe the occasional dispute over mailbox color. But nothing prepared me for Judith Whitmore. She introduced herself within hours of my moving truck pulling away, her short, aggressively practical haircut bobbing with every clipped step toward my front porch. She wore a pastel cardigan like battle armor, her HOA badge gleaming like she was part of some suburban law enforcement unit. "Good afternoon. You must be Daniel Brooks. Welcome to Maple Grove. We run a tight ship here, and I just wanted to drop off a little reading material, our HOA handbook. It's very thorough." She handed me a thick stack of stapled papers. I barely had time to glance at the first page before she continued. "Since you're new, I wanted to personally let you know about a few important regulations. For instance, exterior modifications must be pre-approved, and any business activity conducted from a home must be compliant with our neighborhood aesthetic." I raised an eyebrow. Neighborhood aesthetic? Judith clasped her hands together like a smug kindergarten teacher. "Simply put, no disruptive businesses, nothing unsightly or loud. Oh, and yard decorations must remain in harmony with the natural landscape. We wouldn't want anyone lowering property values, would we?" At that moment, I assumed she was just another self-important HOA enforcer. Annoying? Yes. Dangerous? No. That assumption was my first mistake. 2 weeks later, I received my first violation notice. Unauthorized alteration to property. I stared at the letter in disbelief. My crime? Hanging a string of warm white LED lights along my back patio. Not neon, not flashing, just a simple cozy glow. I approached Judith about it, assuming it was a misunderstanding. "Ah," she said, smiling like a snake oil salesman. "You should have submitted a request form. We have strict policies on exterior lighting. Warm white can be quite garish in certain contexts." Garish? It's softer than streetlights. It disrupts the uniformity. I laughed, waiting for her to drop the act. She didn't. "Judith, come on. The Johnsons have a floodlight bright enough to land planes," she sniffed. "That was installed before my tenure as HOA president. We must look forward, not backward, Daniel. Consider this a warning." A warning? I thought it was ridiculous, but I complied. I took the lights down, figuring that was the end of it. That was my second mistake. The second violation notice came a week later. Unauthorized business operation. Now this one pissed me off. I work remotely as a graphic designer. No customers, no inventory, just me and my laptop. Yet, according to Judith, my profession constituted commercial activity within a residential zone. "You're making money out of your home," she said smugly. "Judith, so is every remote worker in America. You going to fine the guy down the street for being a freelance accountant? Don't be argumentative, Daniel. It's unbecoming." I gritted my teeth. "You can't enforce this. It's not illegal." "Legal or not, Maple Grove has standards. You'll be fined $500 for non-compliance." I was stunned. "Are you serious?" As a heart attack, I refused to pay. That's when the real harassment began. First, the fines increased. Every few days, another notice. Failure to comply, $750 final. Warning, $1,250, legal action pending. Then came the letters taped to my door, the kind meant to humiliate, with phrases like, "Refusal to follow HOA guidelines is a direct violation of community trust. Your neighbors deserve better than willful. Defiance or failure to comply will result in further action." One morning I found my trash cans missing. Judith claimed I had placed them 6 inches outside the designated bin zone. Days later, my mailbox lock was mysteriously jammed. I had to call a locksmith. Then, the parking citation, a bright orange ticket on my own damn car, claiming I was blocking the sidewalk. I wasn't. The wheels weren't even touching the concrete. When I tried confronting her again, she just smiled, because she wanted this fight. "You're bringing this on yourself, Daniel," she said, with faux sympathy. "Wouldn't it just be easier to follow the rules?" That was when I started digging. I pulled up Maple Grove's public records and found something strange. There was no legally filed HOA, no state registration, no tax documents, nothing. Judith Whitmore's Maple Grove Homeowners Association didn't officially exist. The fines, fake. The regulations, fake. The legal threats, completely fraudulent. She was running a full-blown scam, extorting homeowners under the guise of HOA authority. And I wasn't the first victim. That's when I made my third biggest mistake. I let her know that I knew. The next day, a black SUV rolled up to my house. Two guys in knockoff uniforms stepped out, pretending to be law enforcement. "Sir," one of them said, his sunglasses comically oversized, "we're here regarding your outstanding violations with the Maple Grove HOA." I folded my arms. "Let me see your credentials." They exchanged glances. "We're with Maple Grove's Enforcement Division." "There is no Maple Grove Enforcement Division." Silence. Then the other guy stepped forward. "Sir, you're in direct violation of multiple HOA ordinances. You need to comply or—" "I am complying," I interrupted, "with actual laws. You two are trespassing. Sir, if you don't settle your outstanding fees, we'll have no choice but to escalate this matter legally." "Oh?" I pulled out my badge. "Because I'm the new police chief, and you just threatened a law enforcement officer with fake legal action." The silence was deafening. Then, like a badly written sitcom, Judith appeared on the sidewalk. "Everything all right, gentlemen?" she asked sweetly. I turned toward her. "Actually, Judith, I was just about to arrest these two for impersonating law enforcement." Her face went white, and just like that, the tables turned. But Judith wasn't done. Just when I thought I had her cornered, she did something even crazier. And that's when things really spiraled out of control. I expected her to panic. Maybe stammer. Maybe run. What I didn't expect was for Judith to smile. "Oh, Daniel," she sighed, shaking her head like I was a misbehaving child. What a terrible misunderstanding. The two fake officers, who were suddenly very aware of how illegal their situation had become, looked to her for guidance, probably expecting some kind of escape plan. Instead, Judith went on the offensive. "I'd hate for this to get out." "Of hand," she continued, loud enough for the nearby neighbors to hear. "It would be such a shame if the new police chief was caught abusing his power over a simple HOA matter." I let out an incredulous laugh. "You sent fake cops to intimidate me." "I informed our community enforcement team about a non-compliant resident," she corrected, smiling like she was doing a customer service seminar. "You're the one making baseless accusations. The audacity. The sheer audacity. You don't even have a legal HOA, Judith." Her eyes darkened, but her voice remained sweet. "Oh, Daniel, Maple Grove is a private community. The homeowners voted me in. It doesn't need state registration to exist. That's not how the law works. That's exactly how a real leader runs a neighborhood." She turned to the growing audience of residents who had stepped out to watch the scene unfold. I spotted old man Crenshaw peering through his blinds, the McKinneys whispering on their porch. "Everyone," Judith announced, her voice carrying, "over the street. I want to deeply apologize that you all have to witness this. It seems Mr. Brooks is confused about how things work here, and rather than take responsibility for his violations, he's resorting to, well, this spectacle." A few neighbors nodded because of course they did. Judith owned this neighborhood, not legally, but socially. She had her hooks in these people. I was outnumbered, and she knew it. The next morning I woke up to find my yard covered in HOA violation notices, hundreds of them. They were plastered over my door, my car, even my mailbox, printed on the same official-looking paper, filled with bogus infractions: unregistered vehicle parking, $500 fine failure to maintain lawn uniformity, $750 fine a non-compliant, front door color, $200, fine I stepped outside, barely awake, and Judith was already there, standing on the sidewalk sipping from a mug that had "blessed" written in cursive. "Good morning, Daniel," she called cheerfully. I held up one of the papers. "Are you serious?" She gestured to my perfectly normal driveway. "Unregistered vehicles are a safety risk. My car is registered." She took another sip of coffee. "Not with Maple Grove." I stared at her. "That's not a thing." "It is now." The rage was building, but she wasn't done. "Oh, and Daniel?" she added, feigning concern. I noticed your grass is exactly 1/4 inch too high. That's a clear violation of HOA policy. I had the board vote on an amendment last night. There is no board, Judith. She shrugged, sipping her coffee. Enjoy your fines, neighbor. Then she walked away. The next 2 days were hell. A notice arrived every hour. New, increasingly ridiculous rules. No gray cars allowed on the street. My car was gray. Trash must be taken out in HOA-approved bins. Only Judith sold the bins. For $299 each, all mail must go through HOA processing first. Then the petition started circulating, a few neighbors whispering, suddenly avoiding eye contact. I cornered the McKinneys. About it, Judith said it's just a precaution, Mrs. McKinney muttered, eyes darting around. A way to ensure everyone's safety. Mr. McKinney looked genuinely uncomfortable. She says you're a danger to the community, Dan. My jaw tightened. What does that even mean? She, mentioned something about you having a criminal history. I froze. She what? That night, my doorbell rang. Not a neighbor, not a fake cop. Real police officers, 2 of them standing on my porch. The lead officer, a stocky guy named Rodriguez, frowned as I opened the door. Mr. Brooks? I nodded slowly. That's me. We got a report that you've been harassing members of this community. I let out a bitter laugh. You're kidding, Rodriguez sighed. Says here you've made threats of violence toward HOA members, that you've been issuing false legal claims and creating a hostile environment. I couldn't believe it. She had actually called the police on me, with a fake report. I'm the police chief in this county, I said, barely restraining my rage. Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. I know. That's why I came myself. He lowered his voice. Look, between you and me, I don't believe a word of it. But we had to follow up. She filed an official complaint. She's running a fraudulent HOA. She has fake cops. Rodriguez nodded. Yeah, we're looking into that now. But she's smart. She knows how to keep it just this side of the law. He glanced over his shoulder. Judith was watching us from her window, smiling. She's trying to build a case against you, Rodriguez muttered. Get you rattled, make you do something reckless. I exhaled slowly. Then I won't give her the satisfaction. Rodriguez nodded, handed me a card, and left. But I knew one thing. Judith wasn't just playing dirty, she was playing for keeps. I spent the next 24 hours digging. I didn't just want evidence that she was scamming people. I wanted something bigger. And then I found it, buried in old records, tucked away in a forgotten legal filing, a deed transfer. A fraudulent one. Judith didn't just invent the HOA. She had forged property documents. She didn't just run a fake operation. She had been illegally seizing control of homes for years, and suddenly I knew exactly how to take her down. I didn't report it yet. No, that would be too easy. I had one more move to make first. Because Judith had spent so long controlling this neighborhood, intimidating people, bending the rules to suit her. But she forgot one thing. I make the rules now. And I was about to end her entire operation. The next morning I set my plan in motion. Judith had spent years manipulating this neighborhood. She didn't just send out fake fines. She controlled people, intimidated them, made them afraid to push back. So I did something she never expected. I let everyone in on the truth. I started by sending anonymously dropped packets to every home in Maple Grove. Inside, copies of the fraudulent deed transfers I had found. Proof that Judith had illegally manipulated property ownership records to seize control of houses. Some were dead homeowners, people who had passed away without direct heirs. Others, people who had moved unaware that Judith had forged documents to assume ownership of their properties, giving her power over who could live there. Every single one of her rules, her fines, her entire HOA, a scam built on outright fraud. Then I set up a public meeting. Judith loved town hall-style events. They were her stage, her chance to lord over the community. So I scheduled an emergency HOA town meeting in the community center and posted an announcement, Judith Whitmore to make important HOA announcement. She couldn't resist. That night, the entire neighborhood gathered. The real police were stationed quietly at the back, waiting. Judith walked in like a queen addressing her court. I was waiting for her at the front, and I had one last surprise. "Good evening, everyone," Judith beamed, spreading her arms like she was about to deliver the Sermon on the Mount. "I'm so glad we could all come together to discuss the future of Maple Grove." I stepped forward. "I agree. Let's discuss the future." She turned, irritated. "Daniel, I'm not sure why you—" I held up the documents loudly, so everyone could see. "These," I announced, "are proof that Judith Whitmore has been committing real estate fraud for years." A ripple of shock ran through the room. "She's been forging documents, assuming ownership of properties, and illegally seizing control of homes that don't belong to her," I continued. "That's how she's been able to bully this neighborhood into submission. She's not an elected official. She's not part of a real HOA. She's a con artist." Judith laughed. Actually laughed. "Daniel," she said, shaking her head, "this is exactly what I mean. Fear-mongering, misinformation. I'm sure whatever you found is just a misunderstanding." I turned to the back of the room. "Detective Rodriguez?" The officers stepped forward. Judith's face froze. "This is an active investigation," Rodriguez announced, "and I have enough here to place you under arrest." For the first time, Judith Whitmore looked afraid. She sputtered. You can't be serious." "Oh, we're very serious," Rodriguez said, as another officer approached her. Judith took a step back, eyes darting around the room for help. But her loyal subjects, the ones she'd manipulated for years, they just stared. Some looked shocked. Others? Vindicated. Mrs. McKinney, the one who had defended her just days ago, stood up. "You've been stealing from us?" she asked, voice shaking. No, I was just protecting the community," Judith insisted, her voice rising. "By stealing property?" Mr. Crenshaw said coldly. By now, her fate was sealed. She tried to run. I kid you not, Judith tried to run. She made it 2 steps before Rodriguez casually stepped in front of her and grabbed her wrist. "Judith Whitmore," he said, "you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and extortion." The cuffs snapped closed. Judith screamed. "This is a mistake!" she shrieked. "I built this neighborhood! I made the rules!" I smiled as the officers dragged her out. "Not anymore, Judith." The aftermath was glorious. Without Judith, her entire fake HOA crumbled overnight. The ridiculous fines, gone. The constant harassment, over. The absurd rules, tossed in the trash where they belonged. Neighbors who had lived in fear for years suddenly breathed freely. But the best part, all, the money Judith had scammed over the years, seized and redistributed. Every single resident who had been extorted got fully reimbursed, including me. With interest. A few weeks later, I sat on my newly renovated patio, lit up by string lights, watching the sunset. There was a knock at my door. It was Mrs. McKinney. She looked sheepish. "Daniel, I wanted to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For believing her. For not standing up sooner." I smiled. "You weren't alone." She hesitated. Then she handed me a plate of cookies. I took them, smirking. "Are these HOA approved?" She laughed. "They are now." As for Judith, oh, she fought. She screamed in court, made insane claims that she had been framed. She swore she would rebuild her empire. But the judge didn't buy a word of it. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and theft. Maple Grove? Officially HOA free. And me? Well, I left one final surprise for Judith. A month into her prison sentence, I sent her a letter. Just a simple note. It read, "Rule number 1 of Maple Grove. No fraudsters allowed." And below it, a fine $500. For failure to maintain neighborhood standards. Never let it be said I don't play by the rules.